Hi, Max Keiser. This is TheKeiser Report.
I'm Stacy Herbert.
Cash, cash, cash. It's raining cash. Yen, drachma, euros, Swiss francs.
Max, actually, I'm Babyface Bernanke because it's all in U.S. dollars. We're printing only U.S. dollars. The Swiss National Bank is printing dollars. The European Central Bank is printing dollars. The Bank of Japan is printing dollars. And the whole world is happy. Europe's debt crisis prompts central banks to provide dollar liquidity. Max, everybody's happy. Why would they need dollars?
Well, if it was like 2008, they would need dollars to unwind all those derivative contracts they've used to foist financial oppression on the world.
That's correct, because the unit of fraud in the global financial system is conducted in which currency?
The U.S. dollar.
That's correct, and that's why everybody needs U.S. dollars at the moment in order to sustain this global Ponzi scheme.
Right, so they're trapped because they can't unwind their little credit freeze-ups without actually getting more dollars. So this is the great game America has played for decades, isn't it? That it's a dollar-based world, and if you don't dance to our tune, we cut off the supply of dollars, and you're trapped.
That's correct, Max. And the next headline, now it's a global bailout. Markets surge after banks band together to shore up faltering Eurozone. So the deal announced means that banks will be able to borrow any amount of money in 3 separate auctions in October, November, and December. And banks will have to put up collateral or security to tap the emergency funds.
Well, yes, this is not a situation where they are borrowing money, because that would imply that there is a bank somewhere with money to lend, which is false. There is the global lending facilities that are controlled by the banking oligarchs who issue debt-based units of fraud, and they do not require banks to have any of minimum asset or collateral value, and the result is this global Ponzi scheme where interest rates must be kept at 0. So who's subsidizing this for real? The savers, the pensioners, the workers. That's who's paying for these bailouts. That's who's paying in the end. So it's a falsehood, what they say. They speak with forked tongue.
But of course, the PSYOPs has convinced much of the global population that it's immoral for the mortgage holder to default on their debts. But in order to sustain this whole global fictitious asset market, we need to continue to print all of this money, and everybody gets happy.
They need to continue to expand the pile of debt upon which the global economy rests, because it's a Ponzi scheme. And this is happening in Europe, isn't it? They're going to go for Eurotarp, which just means that all of Europe zone will be having another new huge lending facility collateralized by nothing, as long as interest rates remain at 0, which means as long as debt slavery remains in place, the wealth and income gaps widen, and social unrest is also becoming more of a factor, isn't it? As the peasants in America, the peasants in Europe, and around the world start to revolt.
This piece in the Daily Mail also points to where the moral hazard comes into the equation. This deal announced by the European and the American and the Japanese and the Swiss national banks, it means taxpayer money is once again on the line to prop up the banking system. Taxpayers could be forced to pick up the bill if the economy plunges into another catastrophic recession. So in the article, they pointed out that the last time the banks allegedly made money. So they're going to try it again, even bigger, because last time it didn't blow up. Let's see about this time.
Well, look, taxpayer is a euphemism for victim of state-sanctioned wealth confiscation. In America, all this supposed reaction to 9/11 to keep people safe is introduced an infrastructure to point a gun at people's head and say, give us your money to pay quote-unquote taxes. That's a gulag state.
So, of course, this big announcement with these 5 central banks providing unlimited amounts of U.S. dollars to banks happened on the very same day that we had another rogue trader in the banking sector. And that takes me to this headline, Max. Rogue trade suspect's family heartbroken. Kweku Adoboli, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. You know, he's been charged with fraud. His father, a retired UN employee from Ghana, John Adoboli, said, quote, "The family is heartbroken because fraud is not our way of life. I brought them up to be God-fearing and to appreciate decency."
Right, so his family doesn't understand that their son is a financial mercenary, right?
Yeah, well, he knew his son was working at UBS and apparently didn't realize that it is an operation of fraud. The man was working on the Delta One desk, which is basically the derivatives desk.
Right, and these are financial mercenaries. They wield weapons of mass financial destruction to cause chaos so that bankers can profit from the volatility. If, in fact, God forbid, they get blown up, do we care as we would if it were a civilian that got blown up? For example, I would posit that since we don't cry when mercenaries in Iraq are killed because that's their job, we should not cry if financial mercenaries get blown up in their line of work, blowing up the global economy.
Yeah, but Max, it would be really nice if they didn't take the whole world down with them. The fact is, you and I are subsidizing this financial mercenary action that you speak of.
That we are, by vis-a-vis being acquiescence to the U.S. and Europeans putting a financial gun to our head and claiming that they need our revenues to somehow buttress a system which is nothing more than a kleptocracy.
So it even sounds like some sort of special ops Delta One. This is the third biggest rogue trade in history after Jerome Kerviel, who also worked on the Delta One desk at Societe Generale. So they're trying to tell us that this is all just rogue traders and bad apples.
Well, Jerome Kerviel, of course, is Societe Generale. You know, he was caught. He's a mercenary. The trade went bad. He went caught. He went down for that action. The CEO and the board of directors at Societe Generale are saying this is a bad apple, as you say. It's a rogue trader. But what do we know now since Jerome Kerviel incident is that the entire board of directors and CEO and management of Societe Generale have been engaged in fraudulent trading, trading with trillions of dollars of derivatives that they have no way to collateralize. The credit default swap market is a fraud. So they are out Jerome Kerviel, Jerome Kerviel. If anything that Jerome Kerviel had to suffer as terms of a penalty, the CEO of Societe Generale and the board of directors should suffer 10 to 20 times worse. That's my solution.
Let's move on to this next headline because this is again, in this world of mercenary work going on in the markets. Silvercore CEO vows fight to the death against short sellers. So this is Chief Executive Officer Roy Fang, and he's the CEO of Silvercore, which is a company listed in Vancouver, but it has silver mine operations in China. Now, he alleges that he's been the victim of a short and distort attack. Short sellers are attacking him with anonymous letters published online and then attacking his share price. He says, quote, "They picked the wrong company. I don't know who my enemy is, but we are a real company. I am going to fight to the death."
Well, he's also referring to naked short sellers. These are people who sell stock in the market that doesn't exist, taking advantage of some of the regulatory loopholes. They just sell markets, they sell stock into the market. The market-making mechanism can't differentiate between a counterfeit share and a non-counterfeit share. The result is the price goes down, even though it's a counterfeit share. Now, he's vowed to fight to the death to protect his stock price against financial terrorists. So my question is, why is it so difficult for people living in Ireland, for people living in Greece, for people living in Spain, for people living in Portugal, for people living in the United States, for people living in the United Kingdom, to understand that they need to also be in a fight to the death against banksters who are selling government bonds short that don't exist, naked short selling of sovereign debt, naked short selling of credit default swaps. They're trying to kill you, and you're wishing you could be their friends. Oh, aren't you adorable? We just want to be friends. Meanwhile, basically, they've got a financial weapon of mass destruction up the schwing, and they've pulled the pin. What are you saying? Hi! Take it. You know, you deserve what you get.
This is like early America, by the way. This is the way Americans used to be. Rogue traders would be hung like they are in China. This guy, he's a real CEO, and he's going to fight to the death. He's willing to die for his company. This is how many bankers have jumped out windows since the disgrace they brought upon financial markets? None.
None. Where are the falling bankers? The flyers of the Great Depression. Even after the '87 crash, when I was working on Wall Street, I had a couple of guys hanging up in closets. Here we got nothing.
Not even in Japan.
Nothing. I mean, there's a culture that's based on ceremonial sepulcher in case of the CEO or somebody, commits loss of face. You would think Jamie or Lloyd would do something, ceremonial sepulcher to, save face. But no, they're out in the town boogieing because, hey, we're the biggest financial rapists in the world. Pour me another cocktail.
So bankers won't do the right thing, but neither will the Justice Department. Let's look at what they go after and who they go after in the American system. Global banking crisis. Once again, trillions of Ben Bernanke's dollars being floating around the world, right? 8 Amish men jailed for not putting orange safety triangles on their buggies. As you can see from this photo, not one single one of these guys is Lloyd Blankfein or Jamie Dimon or any of the other schmatas on Wall Street.
No, well, the problem is that American forces, armed forces, and the CIA and these other idiots, they've run out of people overseas to harass. So they've got to harass people in the Americas now, in the United States, in North America. They've got to be subjected to this type of harassment. This is what the rest of the world has endured for decades. And now people understand why there's a lot of tension out there.
Yeah, well, in fact, why they ended up in jail is because they refused to pay the fine for the ridiculous need of the safety triangle. But finally, these 2 little headlines here, Max, to show you about this, the printing of dollars going on one side of the world, unlimited amounts of money for rogue traders around the world. Gold set to breach $2,000 an ounce by year-end, GFMS. This is Goldfield's mining service, and they're saying that central bankers are seen lifting 2011 purchases to 336 tons. Remember, for the past 10 years, they haven't been buying at all. But I want to compare this, Max, to 2 years ago when you and I here on Keiser Report were telling people that gold would be at $2,000 an ounce soon enough. Why? Because of these, Max. Ben Bernanke's helicopter dollars, Babyface Ben Bernanke, he's making the world happy. Well, that's why we said it would go to $2,000 an ounce. So let's turn back to October 23rd, 2009. This is John Nadler of Kitco.com writing, GFMS says high gold price at $1,000, not sustainable. So John Nadler wrote, in case you have any doubts where this writer stands, he says, gold is not in a bull market. The dollar is in a bear market.
Yes, well, let's talk again with gold at $10,000 an ounce. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way, so stay right there.
Is that so much well, there's a huge misunderstanding.
Totally different.
In the absence of a peace process, the Palestinians will ask the United Nations to upgrade their current observer status to that of full member state.
In the faraway land where human life is ruled by nature, the distant past of planet Earth is carefully preserved by the cold. Ancient animals lie hidden in the deep permafrost. And for those who deal with them, prehistoric times are still not over.
Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Washington, D.C. and speak with Bill Still, the former newspaper editor and publisher, best-selling author, award-winning documentary, writer, director. His feature-length documentary, The Money Masters, is the 15th most viewed film on the Internet in history. He also wrote and directed The Secret of Oz in 2010. Bill Still, welcome, a big welcome to the Keiser Report.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
All right, Bill Still, as a way into your films, The Money Masters and The Secret of Oz, I want to start by asking a question that will most interest our audience. Is there any gold in Fort Knox? And if not, who took it, why, and how?
No, it was, and incidentally, I detail that in my new book, which is entitled No More National Debt. As far as we know, there's no gold left in Fort Knox. There was one peek into Fort Knox in the 1970s. It was either 1973 or 74, which was instigated by an older friend of mine by the name of Ed Durrell. He spent $11 7 million of his dollars. He was a very wealthy Ohio industrialist trying to answer just this question. So they finally opened the doors. They were forced to open the doors in 73 or 74. There were a couple AP reporters, a couple of congressmen, and there's this famous picture of the director of the Mint, Mary Brooks, standing in front of this wall of gold saying, "Look, it's all here." But the problem was they only showed gold vault number 13, which was the smallest of all the gold vaults, and they denied the existence of the central core vault. The AP reporter and photographer on the scene at the time reported that the gold which they showed had a strange orangish hue. And so therefore that means that it had a high copper content. So probably what this was back in the 70s was the remnants of FDR's call-in of gold coins. It was called coin melt. If they had any good deposit gold, which is .995 gold, the only form of gold that's good for international trade, they certainly would have showed a room full of that. My theory is that despite the fact that the U.S. government carries the largest amount of gold on its books, some 248 million ounces, that they probably have zero, except some of this remnant coin melt. It was well known at the time, local newspaper coverage of Fort Knox, Kentucky, where the gold was shipped out by rail and truck to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. We don't know what percentage of it, but at least a large percentage was sent over to London to try to keep down the price of gold during something called the London Gold Pool. And probably once all the gold was cleaned out of Fort Knox, that's when Nixon closed the gold window, and so that's what happened.
Actually, it's funny that we're talking about gold, but you are against a gold standard and instead propose the Monetary Reform Act. So walk us through that.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to get into is, although I love Ron Paul, the statement that he is making on the campaign trail right now is just absolutely ludicrous. And he claims that, and this is almost a direct quote, that according to the U.S. Constitution, only gold and silver can be money. And that's just not the case, Ron. I don't mind people investing in gold and silver. That's great. I don't mind having gold coins or silver coins as a complementary currency. But what we need is debt-free, government-issued money. And on top of that, you need two basic reforms. Number one, you need to eliminate government borrowing. Number two, you need to eliminate the ability of banks to lend money they don't have. This is called fractional reserve lending. This monetary reform alternative or solution has been known for many generations, and I didn't invent it. It's nothing new. I just rediscovered it, and I'm trying to popularize it.
Bill Still, so what your other aisle might suggest in this debate is that by having the fractional reserve banking system, you bring in something called the money multiplier effect. This creates some velocity in the economy, and people are borrowing, and the GDP is growing. So what do they have wrong?
The problem with the money system is that right now banks can lend 10 to 12 times the money they actually have, and that's if they follow the rules. We found out as a result of the 2008 debacle during congressional hearings here that in fact the big U.S. banks, Morgan and Citibank, were leveraged 52 to 1, Fannie and Freddie were leveraged 72 to 1, and Goldman Sachs was leveraged 333 to 1, and about a year ago President Obama got on TV and said, oh, you know what, we just need to eliminate that nasty old reserve requirement altogether. In other words, 333 to 1 is not sufficient for these banks. Only infinity will do. Now, the problem is when you're leveraging money to that extent, once the bubble pops, then you're also leveraging on the way down. In other words, every dollar that comes out of the economy is multiplied then by that multiplication factor, whether it's 10, 12, 52, 72, or 333. So we're going through a major deleveraging of this huge bubble, and the economy absolutely will not come back. That's why you see the specter for the first time of all this money being pumped in by the Fed and it not having the desired result on the economy. We've reached a point for the first time in history called debt saturation. The only way to get out is this monetary reform solution.
Right, you mentioned Ron Paul, and he calls gold and silver the only constitutionally recognized form of money. You're saying that's not really necessarily true, and it brings up these ideas and questions about how money is created in the economy, the relationship in particular between the Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank. This seems to be the most pernicious and weakest point in the U.S. economy for certain. Could you walk us through how that works in terms of the difference between, let's say, the Treasury just issuing its own money?
First, let's back up a little bit. You said it's not necessarily true. It absolutely is not true, and that's according to no less than three Supreme Court decisions. The problem with the Federal Reserve is it merely because it operates under this name, the Federal Reserve System, it's a very thin veneer of a lie, and that's all it is, that the Fed is actually part of the government. And it's disguised, designed to make people think that the government is actually controlling or watching over the big banks, when in fact you and I know that there's a revolving back door between the Fed and the big banks. The Fed is a captive of the big banks. The Fed does not create any money, with the exception of QE1 and 2. All of our money is created as an interest-bearing debt. We are literally, and this is worldwide, we are literally renting every dollar we have in circulation, with the exception of coin money. Now, this is a great deal if you can get it for the banks, but it's a horrible deal. Money should serve the public interest. I'm not interested in nationalizing banking, but I am interested in nationalizing money. We need a healthy, competitive commercial banking establishment that does lend at interest, because if you don't charge interest because of the time value of money, there will never be any lending. But banks cannot control the quantity of money, which they absolutely do today.
Okay, over in the UK right now, they're having a big debate whether they should split the banks up between the speculative bank and the utility bank, or the deposit bank, in the relationship. The UK banking industry is lobbying hard that no ring fencing, as they call it. They don't want any ring fencing. It's going to destroy their economy. And yet it sounds like what you're talking about is that there should be a split up of this function in the banking, and there should be a return to some form of banking which is strictly as a utility.
Yeah, absolutely. That function banks should merely be deposit banks and intermediaries between borrowers and lending. Where you really get into trouble is the fact that they can speculate on the market. That only magnifies the problem of fractional reserve lending. But I mean, even splitting up that function is not going to do it, because you still have banks creating 100% of the money, and that's what the problem is. It's not what backs the money that's important. It's who controls the quantity. And the gold bugs incorrectly believe that gold will control the quantity. But on top of that, even if gold would control the quantity, gold certainly won't control the quantity of money under the current system that's lent out by the big banks using fractional reserve lending.
Okay, so presumably the thought here being that gold could simply be used as a fractional reserve as well. There's nothing to stop a fractional reserve banking standard to emerge and repeating the exact same mistakes that we have currently, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And even if they followed the rules, they're still, at minimum, leveraging the money 10 to 12 times. It's not what backs the money, it's who controls the quantity. And if you're sitting in the bank's driver's seat and you are controlling the quantity of a national money, then by de facto you control the political situation as well. Because if the government needs loans and you aren't willing to lend that money, then you are in absolute control of the government, and that's the situation we find ourselves in today. It's a great job if you're sitting in the bank seat, but it's not a good deal for the average person. Money must serve the public interest.
For our Twitter audience who twittered these questions to Max Keiser's Twitter account, a couple of questions. One from VIM Trading. The question is, say Ireland implemented a debt-free money supply, how would Bill Still propose it should be protected from banksters and speculators?
Well, I mean, this is the basic function of government. You either believe that we, the people, are capable of self-governance, or you don't. And I believe that the reason governments worldwide are seemingly no longer responsive to the voting electorate is because they no longer own the money power. The banks own the money power. So step one is to take take back the money power, and then that will allow government freedom from this banker class, or to a much greater degree in any case. And I think that's the first step.
Another question from the Twitterosphere that was popped up on the Max Keiser Twitter account from C. Thaxter to Bill Still. How can people best put through legislation for their own state banks? Legislation for Washington failed, but it's up again in 2012.
What an excellent question, because right now, today, the State Bank of California, a study bill, actually made it through both the upper and lower house of the California Assembly and now sits on Governor Jerry Brown's desk for signing. I believe it happened about 7 days ago, and he has 12 days to sign it. So there's only about 5 days left to get this signed. Now, that will not implement the state bank. It will implement the very first study commission, giving some money to study the State Bank of North Dakota. And so everybody in California needs to besiege Governor Brown's office at this point. So yes, this can happen, and the first step is to draft legislation so that your state legislatures can apply money to study the Bank of North Dakota model, and they're perfectly willing to help any state.
All right, Bill Still, that's all the time we have. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Bill Still, the director of The Secret of Oz. If you'd like to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.